Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. My name is Thomas, and what I'm about to tell you is something that changed my life in ways I never saw coming. 2 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I thought would be my wife, Margaret, the love of my life. Or at least that's what I believed back then. I thought she was my future. We were set to get married in a few months. I had already imagined our life together. A home, a family, everything. But what I didn't realize back then was that love only works when both people value it the same way. Margaret was different from me in a lot of ways. She was outgoing, loved being the center of attention, and thrived in social settings. I was more grounded, more private, but I didn't mind. At least, not at first. I thought we balanced each other out. I was the steady one, and she was the fire. But sometimes fire burns everything in its path. A few months before the wedding, Margaret started changing. She was going out more, staying out late, and acting distant. At first, I told myself it was just stress from wedding planning. Maybe she needed to blow off some steam, but something didn't feel right. Then one night I realized I wasn't just being paranoid. It was a Friday night, and I had just gotten home from work. I was exhausted, looking forward to a quiet evening. We had been spending less time together lately, and I thought maybe tonight would be different. I ordered food, set up a movie, and waited. Margaret came out of the bedroom dressed to the nines. Tight dress, high heels, makeup done to perfection. I knew that look. "Where are you going?" I asked, already feeling something sink in my chest. She smiled. "Some of my friends are throwing a party downtown. It's going to be amazing, Tom. You should come." I shook my head. "No, I don't want to go." Frustration crept into my voice. "Margaret, you've been out 3 times this week. Don't you think we should spend some time together?" She rolled her eyes as she touched up her lipstick in the mirror. "Thomas, it's just a party. I want to have fun. Aren't we past this stage? We're getting married in a few months. Shouldn't we be focusing on us?" She sighed dramatically. "You're acting like an old man. It's just a few drinks with friends. Why do you always make this a big deal?" "Because I don't understand why you keep choosing nights out over time with me." That's when she snapped. Her face hardened. "I'm going whether you like it or not." And just like that, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. I sat there staring at the wall, trying to understand what just happened. Something felt off. Completely off. Margaret came home late that night, earlier than I expected, but she barely looked at me as she walked in. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her hair was messy, like she had run her fingers through it too many times. She was wearing an oversized hoodie, not her usual style after a night out. Normally she liked to show off, even after a party. But tonight, she was covering up. She tossed her heels by the door and muttered, "I need a shower." I watched her go into the bathroom without another word. She seemed nervous. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes, or the way her voice lacked the usual confidence. I couldn't tell, but my gut was telling me something was wrong. When she came out, she barely spoke, just climbed into bed and turned her back to me. No good night. No explanation about the party. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night, trying to ignore the feeling that something was shifting between us. The next evening, she got home from work and acted normal, like nothing had happened the night before. She greeted me with a casual, "Hey," and dropped her purse on the counter. I played along, acting like I wasn't still bothered by the fight we had before she went out. After dinner, she stretched her arms over her head and sighed. "I need a long shower," she said, walking toward the bathroom. I nodded but said nothing. 30 minutes later, she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. She walked across the room casually, reaching for one of my t-shirts from the dresser. And that's when I saw it, a bruise on her hip. Dark. Deep. The kind that doesn't come from just bumping into something lightly. My stomach twisted. "Margaret," I said carefully, my voice steady. "What happened there?" She looked down at the bruise like she was seeing it for the first time. But then, too quickly, she shrugged. "Oh, that? I bumped into the bar counter last night. Some guy accidentally pushed me." She laughed a little, waving it off like it was nothing, but something about her tone was off. Too casual, too quick. I studied her face. "That bad, huh?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded, pulling the t-shirt over her head. "Yeah, I guess I bruise easily." She said it as if she didn't care. But I noticed her hands fidgeting. She was lying, and Margaret wasn't a good liar. I nodded, pretending to believe her. Yeah, looks like it hurt. She gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's nothing. Anyway, let's go to bed. She climbed under the blankets quickly, facing away from me, as if she wanted to end the conversation before it even began. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Margaret wasn't telling me the truth. And for the first time in our relationship, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. The next few weeks I tried to act like everything was fine, or at least that's what I told myself. Margaret still went out often, always saying she was with Linda, her best friend. I stopped arguing with her about it, stopped asking questions. If she wanted to go, I let her. But deep inside, I was paying more attention than ever, watching, waiting. Then, one night, everything changed. Margaret was in the shower and her phone was on the couch, face up. I wasn't even thinking about checking it. But then, the screen lit up with a message from Linda. I still can't believe you did that. My stomach dropped. Did what? I stared at the message, my pulse hammering in my ears. The curiosity burned through me. My hands were sweating. I had to know. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The lock screen notifications only showed that one message. If I wanted more, I had to unlock it. And I almost did. But then, the bathroom door creaked open. Margaret stepped out, wrapped in a towel, steam rolling out behind her. I put the phone down like it was on fire and grabbed the TV remote, pretending to flip through channels. She didn't notice. She hummed as she walked past me, completely unaware that I had just seen something big. My hands were still shaking. That night I lay in bed beside her, my body stiff as a board. I could hear her breathing, slow, steady, peaceful, like someone who had nothing to hide. But she did. And for the first time I didn't feel guilty about what I was about to do. Slowly I reached across the bed, careful not to make the mattress shift too much. Her phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up and slipped out of bed, moving silently into the living room. Once I was alone, I took a deep breath and unlocked it with the passcode I had seen her use 100 times. The screen lit up. Messages. I opened her conversation with Linda, and then, my blood turned to ice. The night she went to that party, the one she had argued with me about, stormed out for, it wasn't just a regular party. It was a swingers party. And that night, Margaret had slept with 3 men at the same time. At the same time. I froze, my grip tightening around the phone. My vision blurred for a second, my stomach twisting like I was going to be sick. I scrolled further, my hands shaking now. They weren't just going out. They were meeting men. They were going on dates. They were sleeping around. This wasn't just one mistake. It had been happening for 6 months. I couldn't breathe. Every time she had looked me in the eyes and said, "I love you," she was lying. Every time she kissed me before leaving for another girls' night, she was cheating. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. My mind screamed at me to wake her up, shake her, demand answers. But I didn't. I put the phone back, slipped into bed again, and stared at the ceiling. I needed to be smart about this. If she could lie to my face for 6 months, I could pretend for a few more days. Because now I needed proof. I needed to catch her in the act. And when I did, I would make sure there was no way she could talk her way out of it. 2 days later, she had another girls' night planned. But now I knew the truth. I acted completely normal. I kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun. Then, as soon as she left, I followed her. She drove across town, picked up Linda, and then went to a bar downtown. I parked my car across the street and watched as they walked inside. Minutes later, 2 men arrived. They greeted Margaret and Linda like they were old friends. They hugged. They laughed. Margaret touched one of the men's arms, leaning in, whispering in his ear. She was flirting. I took out my phone and snapped photo after photo. An hour later, they left the bar. Margaret and Linda got into her car. The 2 men got into theirs, and then they drove to a hotel. I watched as Margaret stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress before turning to the man she had been laughing with all night. He pulled her close, and without hesitation, she tilted her head up and kissed him. My stomach twisted, but my hand stayed steady as I snapped a photo. Then another. She laughed softly against his lips, took his hand, and they walked into the hotel together, like I had never existed. There was no doubt now, no excuses. Margaret was a liar and a cheater, and I had proof. I didn't wait. I drove home, grabbed a suitcase, and packed whatever I could. My movements were fast, deliberate. No hesitation, no second guessing. When I was done, I slid off my engagement ring, staring at it for a brief moment before placing it on the kitchen counter. A silent message, a final goodbye. Then, without looking back, I walked out the door. For good. The next morning I woke up in a hotel room, the unfamiliar ceiling above me reminding me that my life had just taken a sharp, irreversible turn. My body felt heavy, my mind exhausted, but the moment I reached for my phone, any trace of grogginess vanished. Dozens of missed calls, all from Margaret. The notifications flooded my screen. Texts, voicemails, desperate attempts to reach me. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What's going on? I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over her name for a moment. I ignored them. I wasn't going to respond. I had nothing to say to her. Instead, I took a deep breath and made a few calls, and just like that, the wedding was canceled. But that wasn't enough. Margaret had spent months sneaking around behind my back, lying, cheating, humiliating me, and now she was probably panicking, scrambling to come up with an excuse, a way to spin this in her favor. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I opened my messages and created a group chat. Her parents, my parents, our closest friends, everyone who had received a wedding invitation. Then, with steady hands, I attached the photos. Margaret kissing another man, walking into a hotel with him. Clear, undeniable. Finally, I typed out a message. The wedding is canceled. Here's why. And then, I hit send. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I didn't need to see the reactions. The truth was out now. There was no undoing it. Without a second thought, I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the bed. I leaned back against the headboard and exhaled. It was over, and for the first time in months I felt free. Margaret lost it. The moment I turned my phone back on, it exploded with messages, calls, voicemails. She was panicking, desperate to do damage control. What did you do? Please, let's talk. It's not what you think. I didn't bother listening to her voicemails. I didn't bother reading her texts. What could she possibly say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? That it wasn't what I thought it was, despite the undeniable proof in those photos? No. I let the phone ring and ring, each call more frantic than the last, until finally, the notifications slowed down. She knew. She knew I wasn't coming back. I was already gone. I packed up my life and moved to another city, somewhere far enough that I wouldn't have to run into anyone who knew me as Margaret's fiancé. I found a new job, a new apartment, a new version of myself that didn't live in the shadow of her betrayal. At first, the silence felt strange. I had spent so long in a relationship that revolved around someone else's choices, waiting for Margaret to come home, wondering where she was, convincing myself that her absence didn't mean anything. Now, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I threw myself into work, hit the gym, and focused on rebuilding myself. I never looked back. Months passed, then a year. I didn't try to find out what happened to her, but people talk. Rumors have a way of finding their way back to you. Margaret's life had fallen apart. Her parents? Furious. They had been blindsided, humiliated by the wedding scandal. I heard they stopped speaking to her for a while. Her new relationships? None of them lasted. Apparently, the men she had so eagerly thrown herself at weren't interested in anything serious. And her reputation? Ruined. The same people she had once partied with, the same friends who encouraged her behavior, turned on her once they realized she wasn't loyal to anyone, including them. But I didn't care. Not once did I feel pity for her. Not once did I feel the urge to check in, to see if she was okay. Because she made her choice, and I made mine. Thank you for watching.